When Marcus Reed walked into the bank that morning, he had no idea that just 15 minutes later, the very people mocking him would lose their careers. The Texas sun sliced through the Dallas sky, reflecting off the glossy black Tesla Model S that had just stopped in front of the Southern Capital Bank branch. The clock read 10:15. Not early, not late, precise to the minute, just as Marcus preferred. He stepped out of the car, the door closing, with a clean, efficient sound. He wore a deep blue tailored suit, a crisp white shirt, and a neatly knotted tie. The scent of freshly polished leather from his brown shoes mingled with the city's warm air. Every detail spoke of a man who had climbed every rung of the social ladder by his own effort. He looked like any other businessman, except in the eyes of others, he didn't look like a CEO. Inside the air conditioner blew a dry, sterile cold. The silence was almost unnatural, broken only by the tapping of keys and the faint scent of stale coffee. Marcus stopped at the reception desk and offered a polite smile. "Good morning." The young woman behind the counter, Sharon Miller, 26 years old, didn't look up. Her eyes stayed fixed on the computer screen, her fingers moving quickly, silently declaring, "I'm busier than you are." Marcus repeated his tone, gentler. "I need to make an international transfer. Headquarters told me I could come directly to this branch." Only then did Sharon glance up, her voice detached. "Do you have an appointment?" "No. I was informed that I didn't need one." "Then take a seat. The manager will come out." She waved a hand, as if shooing away a fly. No name, no smile, no. "How can I help you?" Just a cold, invisible wall between them, clear and sharp as glass. Marcus looked around. 2 customers were signing documents in the far corner, 3 employees quietly working. He sat down back, straight hands, resting lightly on the leather portfolio in his lap. 10 minutes passed. A drop of sweat slid down his neck, not from heat, but from the hollow stillness. The office door opened. Pamela Grant, 45. The branch manager walked out. Her grey dress hugged her frame, her heels striking the tiles with crisp precision. Her short haircut framed sharp eyes that swept over Marcus as if assessing his worth. "What do you need?" Her voice was cold, exact, devoid of warmth. Marcus stood, extended his hand. Marcus Reed Links Systems. Pamela didn't take it, simply turned and said, "Follow me." He sat across from her desk, opened his briefcase, and spoke clearly. "I need to transfer $7 million from our corporate account to a real estate partner in Phoenix. Here are the verification documents and the transfer order." Pamela took the folder, skimmed a few lines, then set it down as if it were scrap paper. "That's a large sum. Can you verify the source of the funds?" Marcus frowned slightly. "It's all there in the file. This is the 3rd transaction this month. 2 other branches processed everything without issue." Pamela shrugged. "We're different. Here we follow the rules." Follow the rules, those 2 words landed like a verdict disguised as courtesy. There was no shouting, no insult, but something deeper, suspicion, wrapped in professionalism. In that moment, Marcus understood clearly. He wasn't being questioned because the documents were incomplete. He was being questioned because they didn't believe a man like him could have that kind of money. He met Pamela's eyes. "I understand," he said quietly. "Please return my papers." She handed them back reluctantly. Marcus buttoned his jacket, nodded slightly. No need for anger, no need to prove anything. He simply walked out like a man leaving a place where respect had become a rare commodity. Outside, the Dallas sun burned like fire. He leaned lightly against his car, watching the passing crowd. A dull ache spread through his chest, the kind of pain that made no sound. This wasn't the first time he'd been treated, as if he didn't belong. But something in Pamela's eyes brought back a memory, his childhood in the suburbs of Rock Hill, when his grandmother used to say, "Son, some people only recognize crowns if they're made of gold. But yours is made of spine. Keep it straight, and you'll never have to bow to anyone." Marcus smiled faintly, a sad but peaceful smile. He took out his phone and made a call. He spoke only one sentence. "I need you at the Dallas branch. 15 minutes. Nothing more. No threats. No anger." Sometimes power doesn't come from shouting. It comes from the silence of someone who knows exactly who they are. He took off his jacket, folded it neatly onto the back seat, then stood by his car watching people move in and out of the bank as if nothing had happened. None of them, not Sharon, not Pamela, not even the young clerk wiping the counter, had any idea that the man they had dismissed was the owner of the very bank they worked for. Inside, Pamela's voice still dripped with arrogance. He looked like the type who pretends to be rich, thinks a fancy suit makes him somebody. Sharon laughed, and he looked at me like I owed him money. The young employee, Ethan Brooks, kept his head down, quietly polishing the counter. He knew something was wrong but stayed silent, afraid to speak, afraid to lose his job. Outside, Marcus stood still, hands in his pockets, the sunlight gleaming across his calm face. His eyes no longer held hurt, only awareness. He knew that truth didn't need arguments. It only needed time. And in just a few more minutes, the storm would walk through that glass door, not with thunder, but with the calm voice of a woman who would set things right and prove that today's silence would soon be repaid by tomorrow's justice. Inside the bank, the air felt heavier than before. The hum of the air conditioner continued, but the real chill spreading through the room didn't come from the vents. It came from attitude. Pamela Grant sat behind her desk, holding a cup of coffee, a faint smirk curling on her lips. "So many people live in delusion these days," she said, eyes still fixed on her screen. "They think a nice suit and an expensive car can fool us." The young receptionist, Sharon Miller, laughed. He looked at me like I'd done something wrong. That kind of, "I'm more important than you" attitude. "So annoying." The young teller, Ethan Brooks, said nothing. He kept wiping the counter, his hand trembling slightly. He didn't dare look at the two women, but guilt was tightening in his chest. He had seen how that man spoke. No arrogance, no attitude, just calm and polite. Yet in this place, calmness was mistaken for weakness. Pamela set down her cup, her voice full of self-satisfaction. "Listen, Sharon. People like that are either trying to get loans they can't afford, or they're con artists. I've been in this business 20 years. I can spot them a mile away." Sharon nodded eagerly, mimicking her boss's tone of disdain. "Yes, I thought so too. Probably printed fake papers and thought he could get away with it." Ethan swallowed hard. He wanted to say, "You're wrong," but the words never came out, because in this branch, people who spoke the truth didn't last long. The glass door opened quietly. A woman walked in. Sunlight followed her into the lobby, glinting off the polished floor. She wore a light grey business dress with a cream blouse, buttoned to the collar. Her hair neatly pinned her gaze, sharp but calm. "Good morning," she said softly to Sharon, her voice gentle, but carrying weight that made Sharon stand up without thinking. "Good morning, Mum." "How can I help you?" "I'm looking for the branch manager, Mrs. Pamela Grant." Sharon froze slightly before asking, "I'm sorry you are." The woman smiled. "I'm Laura Jennings, Vice President of Internal Operations at Evermark Financial." The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. Sharon stiffened her mouth opening, but no sound coming out. Evermark Financial, the parent company of Southern Capital Bank. "Oh, of course, Mrs. Jennings, please, one moment." Sharon stammered as she hurried to call Pamela, her voice trembling like a thread. Pamela emerged, her face stretching into an uneasy smile. "Mrs. Jennings, what an honor! I wasn't informed of your visit." Laura replied, her tone soft yet cold. "It wasn't planned, but this morning something required my personal attention." Her eyes swept the lobby, pausing on the leather chair where Marcus had been sitting earlier. "The man who was here earlier," Laura said evenly, "his name is Marcus Reed, CEO of Lynx Systems. And he's also the man who just acquired the majority stake in Evermark Financial." The entire room froze. Pamela went pale, her smile vanishing. Ethan's jaw dropped. Sharon's pen slipped from her hand and clattered onto the floor. Laura took another step forward, her tone clear and steady. "Mr. Reed came here this morning to perform a perfectly legitimate transaction with documentation verified by headquarters. And from what I've been told, not only was he delayed, but he was also treated with suspicion and disrespect." Pamela tried to steady her voice. "There must be some misunderstanding. We were just following procedure." Laura tilted her head slightly, her eyes piercing. "And your procedure includes ignoring clients, failing to verify identities, and demanding proof without even checking their documents." Sharon kept her head down. Ethan stood frozen, his heart pounding wildly. At that moment, Marcus walked back in a no jacket, just a white shirt, sleeves rolled up, his expression calm. Yet his composure silenced the entire room. Laura turned to him with a respectful nod. "Mr. Reed." Marcus returned the gesture. "Thank you for coming so quickly." He looked at Pamela. "I came here to do business, not to be judged, but the moment I stepped in, I could feel it. You didn't see me as a client. You saw me as a mistake in your system." Pamela took a deep breath, trying to explain. "I didn't mean anything by it. I was just being cautious." Marcus smiled faintly, but there was fire in his eyes. "You meant nothing, yet your actions said everything. I saw how you looked me up and down. I heard the way you said procedure, like an excuse to strip away respect. And I saw how your receptionist looked at me like a problem." Sharon whispered, I was just following instructions." Marcus cut in his tone, steady. "Instructions never authorize disrespect." Silence fell. No one moved. Then Laura spoke, her calm voice colder than any shout. "I want to see the customer log for the last 2 hours." Sharon stumbled to find the file and handed it over with both hands. Laura flipped through a few pages, then pointed to a blank line. "Here, 1017. No entry under Marcus Reed. No record of transaction. No internal contact. Just a note, waiting for manager." She looked up. "Explain that, Mrs. Grant," Pamela stammered. I didn't know that name. I thought maybe he was a fraud," Laura interrupted. "Yes, I just wanted to ensure safety." Laura pressed her lips together. "Safety for whom? For the customer or for your prejudice?" The air froze solid. Ethan bowed his head, his chest tightening. He knew she was right, and he knew he'd stayed silent too long. Marcus turned to him. "Did you think I was a scammer?" Ethan lifted his eyes, voice trembling. "No, sir. I didn't know what to do. I knew it wasn't right." But Marcus nodded slowly. "I understand. You stayed quiet because you were afraid. But remember, silence is also a choice, and sometimes it's crueler than words." Pamela inhaled shakily, her eyes glistening. "I've worked here 17 years. I didn't mean any harm, I just didn't know who you were." Marcus looked at her, his voice soft but cutting like a blade. "And that's exactly the problem. If I weren't someone, you would have treated me the same way. Because your respect isn't built on principle, it's built on status." A long silence spread through the room, heavy as the setting sun. Laura glanced at her watch. "You have 5 minutes," she said quietly, her tone sharp as glass. Pamela blinked in confusion. 5 minutes for what? To call anyone you think can protect you. After that, this branch will undergo a full internal audit. Ethan swallowed hard. Sharon took a step back. Pamela stood frozen. Marcus looked around the room, the same room where just 15 minutes earlier he had been treated like an outsider, and exhaled slowly. He wasn't angry. He wasn't triumphant. Only a deep sadness lingered. Because sometimes justice doesn't arrive with noise. It arrives in silence, the kind that forces everyone in the room to confront what they've become. "You have 5 minutes." The sound echoed through the bank lobby like a verdict that needed no courtroom. The room fell into complete silence. The clock on the wall ticked, 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 each beat tightening the breath of everyone present. Pamela Grant stood motionless. Her face had gone pale, her lips moving faintly, as if searching for words of defense, but no sentence could break through the dense stillness. Ethan Brooks glanced at Sharon Miller. She stood behind the counter, hands trembling as she gripped her pen, eyes full of confusion. Everyone seemed to be waiting for something, a miracle, a call, a rescue. But no call came. Laura Jennings remained standing in the center of the lobby, her posture, straight eyes glancing at her watch. 4.5 minutes, she said. Her tone was even calm, yet sharper than any shout. Marcus Reed watched silently. He said nothing. He didn't need to. In his eyes, something had gone out, the simple belief in fairness. He used to think that if you behaved with integrity, others would treat you the same. But today had reminded him that civility still had classes, and he didn't belong to the upper one, not until people realized he had power. Pamela jolted, as if waking from a daze. She turned, walking briskly into her office, her high heels clacking urgently on the tile. The door closed behind her. No one in the lobby spoke. Laura lifted her head, her gaze sweeping across the room. "Mr. Brooks," she said, "what do you think about what happened this morning?" Ethan froze. He felt pulled out of his small, safe zone, the place where silence had always been his best shield. I think Laura interrupted. "Tell the truth. Don't think." Ethan inhaled deeply. "I think it was wrong. The way we treated Mr. Reed. I didn't say anything, but I knew it was wrong." Marcus looked at him and gave a slow nod, one that simply said, "I hear you." Laura replied, "Silence is an action too, Ethan, and sometimes it carries the same consequences as doing wrong." He lowered his head. "I understand." In her office, Pamela kept dialing number after number. No one answered. Sweat rolled down her temples. She grabbed the desk phone and tried the regional switchboard, busy. She called the area manager voicemail. Every failed beep felt like a blade to her chest. On the desk sat an old photo, her with the staff, when the branch first opened. Smiling faces, white shirts, the slogan behind them reading, "We serve with trust." Pamela stared at it, her heart tightening. Trust, the word now, sounded painfully ironic. 3 minutes left. Outside, Laura opened her notebook. Her voice was calm, steady, as if reading a routine report. No identity verification, no customer record, no contact with headquarters, no respect. And not one person spoke up. Sharon trembled. "I was just following protocol. I was afraid of making a mistake," Laura replied. "No one ever gets fired for doing what's right, but many lose their jobs for being afraid to." Marcus remained silent. He was looking out the glass doors. Sunlight cut across his face, drawing sharp lines of light. Inside him, something boiled, not anger at being insulted, but the painful realization that after all these years of achievement, it still wasn't enough for people to see him as equal. He remembered a board meeting a few months ago when the acquisition of Evermark was approved. One white director had asked him, "Are you sure you understand how a bank operates?" Marcus had simply smiled. "I don't just understand it," he said. "I just bought it." 2 minutes. Pamela emerged from the office, her face ashen phone still glowing in her hand. "I can't reach anyone." Laura nodded slightly. "I expected as much." Pamela turned toward Marcus, her voice trembling but trying to stay firm. "I'm sorry. I judged too quickly. But I was only doing my job. I didn't know who you were." Marcus turned, his eyes meeting hers. His voice was low and steady, but heavy with meaning. "That's the second time today you've said that. I didn't know who you were." "Then what if I were nobody? Would I still deserve respect? Or is it only when I have power that you realize you were wrong?" Pamela was silent. A single tear slid down her cheek, but no one pitied her. Because what she lost today wasn't just a job. It was her moral compass. Laura closed her notebook and looked at her watch. Time's up. In that moment, no one breathed. Even the clock seemed to stop ticking. Laura spoke slowly. "This branch is officially placed under internal audit. All system access will be revoked before the end of the day. The entire staff will be suspended until the review is complete." Sharon staggered, clutching the counter. "Wait, what did you say?" Laura turned to her, her voice firm. "I'm not talking about punishment. I'm talking about consequences. And this is the consequence of attitude." Ethan bowed his head, his heart pounding. He had just witnessed justice delivered without shouting, without force, only through the power of truth. Pamela stood frozen. "I've worked here 17 years, Laura cut her off. "And in those 17 years, how many people have you treated like Mr. Reed this morning? How many walked in with hope and left feeling small?" Pamela said nothing. She knew the answer, and it was hard to swallow. Marcus stepped forward and placed his hand on the counter. "You're right. I'm not somebody. I'm just a man who wants to be treated like a human being. But maybe here that's still a luxury." Silence followed. The only sound was Laura's pen signing the report. Ethan looked up and saw that in Marcus's eyes there was no satisfaction, only deep understanding and quiet sorrow. Because Marcus knew fairness could never erase old wounds, it only teaches you how to stand tall without shouting. Laura closed her file and said simply, "Meeting adjourned." Pamela sank into her chair, burying her face in her hands. Sharon turned away, shoulders trembling. Ethan stood still, caught between two worlds, the silence of the past and the awakening of what's to come. Marcus walked toward the door. Sunlight flooded in, casting long streaks across the cold floor. He didn't look back, because behind him, justice had already spoken, and before him, change had begun in silence. The bank lobby was so silent you could hear a pen drop, the faint smell of stale coffee mixed with the heavy air of tension. No one spoke. No one dared. Laura Jennings stood in the center, poised in her grey business dress, holding the folder she had just signed. Every word she was about to speak felt like the precise incision of justice not rushed, not slow, but never wrong. Effective immediately, she said, her calm voice making every heartbeat quicken. This entire branch will be placed under emergency internal audit. All account access transactions and system operations will be suspended before the end of today. Sharon Miller gasped. "Wait, Mrs. Jennings?" Laura looked directly at her. There was no anger in her eyes, only complete disappointment. "Miss Miller, this morning you not only failed to welcome a client, you helped sustain an environment where contempt was treated as normal. Do you have anything to say for yourself?" Sharon opened her mouth, but no words came out. She bowed her head as tears began to fall. "I didn't mean to. I just thought I was doing what I always do, and it's that always," Laura said softly. "That's the most frightening part." The air thickened. The ceiling lights reflected off the floor like 1,000 eyes watching. Pamela Grant lifted her head, her voice hoarse. "Mrs. Jennings, I'm sorry. I know I was wrong. But I've worked here 17 years. I helped build this branch from the ground up." "I can't take responsibility for your actions," Laura interrupted. Pamela froze. "I'm not dismissing you for a procedural error," Pamela Laura continued. "I'm dismissing you because you forgot what your job truly is. A bank doesn't just hold money, it holds trust. And this morning you dropped it." Pamela sank into her chair, her hands gripping the edge of the desk, her eyes red and wet. Marcus Reed stood quietly in the corner of the lobby. He watched it all unfold with no trace of satisfaction on his face, only a quiet sorrow, as though he wasn't witnessing someone's downfall, but the confirmation of a truth he'd known for too long. Laura went on, her tone steady, as if every word had been waiting years for this moment. "Mrs. Grant, Miss Miller, you are both officially terminated as of today. All settlements and documentation will be sent from headquarters within 48 hours. Please vacate the transaction area immediately." Sharon broke down in tears, unclipping her name badge with shaking hands. Pamela didn't cry. She stood up slowly and walked toward the door like someone leaving behind a piece of herself. But before stepping out, she turned to Marcus. "You destroyed my career in an hour," she said, her voice trembling but still clinging to pride. Marcus replied, his expression unchanged. "No, Mrs. Grant. I just held up a mirror. You did the rest." The words hit her like a blow. Pamela tightened her grip on her bag and walked away without another word. The door closed behind her with a cold click, the final punctuation to 17 years of work. Laura turned her gaze to Ethan Brooks, the only one still standing at the counter, pale but not avoiding her eyes. "And you," she said, "Ethan Brooks. You're the youngest here, but at least you had the courage to admit your mistake." Ethan swallowed hard. I know I should have spoken up, but I was afraid of losing my job. I was wrong." Laura nodded slightly. "You weren't wrong alone, but your silence made you part of it. For that reason, you won't be terminated, but you will be suspended and reassigned to another branch for retraining. Your future depends on what you learn from today." Ethan nodded, his voice trembling. "Thank you, Mom. I won't forget this." Marcus smiled faintly at him. "Don't thank me. Just remember next time, don't wait for someone else to speak up for you." Laura closed the file and spoke clearly, her voice carrying across the room. "This isn't just punishment. It's a reminder. Any organization, no matter how large, begins to crumble the moment it forgets its core value, respect for people." The air in the lobby felt lighter, but not from relief. It was the stillness that follows a storm after it strips away all pretense. Pamela and Sharon were gone. Ethan was tidying up the counter. Laura signed a few final papers, then turned to Marcus. Everything's done. I'll handle the internal report from here. Marcus nodded. Thank you, Laura. She looked at him, her eyes a mix of admiration and sadness. Do you know what makes me saddest about this? What that this morning they didn't treat you poorly because of who you are. They treated you poorly because they thought you were nobody. Marcus stayed silent. A faint smile crossed his lips, but beneath it was a storm. And that he said slowly, is the real sickness of this world. Laura nodded. You're right. And curing it doesn't take power. It takes awareness. The two walked outside. The midday sunlight poured over them, illuminating Marcus's face. He took a deep breath. The hot wind carried the scent of exhaust, the sound of horns, the rhythm of life that kept moving, as if nothing had happened. But inside him, everything had changed. He remembered his grandmother's words, "Keep your back straight, my boy. Because when you bow to injustice, you lose yourself." Marcus smiled softly. He didn't need an apology. He didn't need praise. What he wanted had already arrived, a lesson delivered at the exact price of arrogance. Back inside the bank, Ethan looked around the empty lobby. The leather chair where Marcus had once sat still held a faint impression. He ran a hand over the cold surface of the counter where the morning's papers had rested. Shame and awakening welled up in his chest. He thought to himself, I just witnessed something far greater than a firing. I saw how a person's dignity can change an entire room. Outside the glass doors, Marcus stepped toward his car. He paused for a moment, glancing at his reflection, not to see if he had won or lost, but to make sure he was still himself. No anger. No resentment. Only clarity. Laura looked at him and said quietly, You don't need to say anything. Today's story will tell itself. Marcus replied, his voice calm. I don't need them to know who I am. I just need them to remember that respect should never depend on a business card. They shook hands. No farewell was needed. Marcus Reed stepped into the Texas sunlight where the heat didn't burn, it purified. Behind him, the bank door closed, and with it, an era of polite hypocrisy came to an end. The next morning, Dallas was not the same Dallas as the day before. The sun still shone, but the chill of the news had crept into every corner of the city. On the front page of the Morning Ledger, the bold headline read, CEO Marcus Reed fires entire Southern Capital Bank, branch after discrimination incident. The news spread like wildfire, not because people cared about banking, but because the story struck a nerve everyone had felt before being judged by appearance. In a small house in the suburbs of Richardson, Pamela Grant sat at her kitchen table, her eyes sunken from a sleepless night. Next to a cold cup of coffee lay her phone. No calls, no emails, not a single message of comfort. She scrolled through social media. The story was everywhere, and the comments poured in like hail serves her right. Everyone knows that arrogant customer service type. Hope they finally learn that power doesn't wear a uniform. Pamela set the phone down, her hands trembling slightly. She had spent 17 years in the industry, convinced she understood people. But in truth, she had only learned to judge them. In her mind, Marcus Reed's calm smile returned that steady gaze that wasn't angry, but somehow made your heart tighten. If I were nobody, would you still see me as suspicious? That question echoed in her empty home, like a voice from the walls. Pamela asked herself, where did I go wrong? The answer was painfully simple from the very first look. A few miles away in a small apartment near downtown, Ethan Brooks packed his personal belongings into a cardboard box. Outside the window, Sunlight poured in warm and golden, but inside his heart felt heavy. He hadn't been fired, but his silence yesterday still clung to him like a scar. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "I heard you've been reassigned. Learn what you need to learn. Be better." Mr. Ethan stared at the screen. His chest tightened. He typed slowly, "I will." "I'm sorry." The message was sent. No reply came. And Ethan understood some apologies don't need answers. He stood there looking at the box in his hands and realized something. He hadn't lost his job. He'd been given a chance, because for the first time in his life, he truly understood the weight of silence, and he swore he would never again let it hide his fear. Across the city, the top floor of Link Systems glowed with light. Marcus Reed sat in his glass-walled office, a file on the Arizona project, waiting for his signature. Outside nighttime, Dallas sparkled. City lights stretched across the horizon like an artificial galaxy. On his desk, his phone lit up with a new message. It was from Laura Jennings. "Audit complete. The Dallas branch has new leadership. All staff undergoing retraining on service and conduct standards." L.J. Marcus looked at the screen for a few seconds, then locked it without replying. He didn't need to. Some things spoke for themselves. He leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. The hum of the air conditioner blended with the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, calm, deep, peaceful. Not the peace of victory, but the peace of having chosen what was right. At noon, a young employee knocked and entered, holding a fresh cup of coffee. "Mr. Reed, I've placed another contract from Phoenix on your desk." Marcus opened his eyes and smiled. "Thank you." He looked at the young man. His shirt slightly wrinkled, his voice polite, his eyes sincere. For a brief moment, Marcus saw himself 20 years earlier, the young man who had once been thrown out of a bank by a security guard for looking unreliable. Back then he had made a vow. "If one day I have the power to change this, I will." And today, he had kept that vow. As the evening fell, the sunset washed across the glass walls, painting his face in a warm orange glow. Marcus opened his laptop and revisited the morning headlines. The media reported, social networks debated, thousands of comments poured in, some praising, some criticizing. But amid the noise, one comment made him stop scrolling. He didn't do it to seek revenge. He did it to teach the world how to treat each other. Marcus chuckled softly, a quiet, thoughtful laugh. Yes, he hadn't wanted to destroy anyone. He just wanted to hold up a mirror to the truth people preferred to ignore. That night, Pamela still sat at her dining table, the dim yellow light casting shadows on the empty surface. Her phone buzzed. A new email from the HR department termination letter. Effective immediately. She closed her eyes. The final tear fell onto the keyboard. No more anger. Only regret. She remembered the look in Ethan's eyes caught between right and wrong. She remembered Marcus's calm voice when he said, "I'm just here to work." And she remembered herself, the woman who had let prejudice override reason. She opened her laptop and began to type a reply. To Mr. Reed, I don't expect forgiveness, but thank you for teaching me a lesson that 17 years of work never could, that respect is not a privilege, it's a duty. Pamela Grant. She didn't know if he would read it, but at least she had said it. And sometimes owning your shame is the first step toward redemption. Night fell quietly over Dallas. Marcus left his office driving through the glowing streets. The radio played the evening news, the anchor's voice, calm and steady. The incident at Southern Capital Bank has sparked nationwide discussion. CEO Marcus Reed stated, "Justice doesn't need to be loud, it just needs to be seen." Marcus smiled faintly. They had misunderstood part of it, but it didn't matter. He didn't need praise. He just wanted the message to remain. On his drive home, the night breeze slipped through the window. Dallas glittered as always, but inside him everything was strangely still. Not the stillness of pain, but the quiet of healing. He stopped at a red light, the glow reflected in his eyes. Beside him, an old black man in a worn car looked over and nodded. Marcus nodded back with a smile. No words were spoken, but the exchange said enough. "I know you did the right thing." The light turned green. Marcus pressed the pedal, his car gliding into the night, leaving behind the noise, and carrying with him only one belief that respect begins with how we treat those who have nothing to give us. 3 days later, the atmosphere at the Lynx Systems headquarters in downtown Dallas was still buzzing. Young employees moved briskly between glass-walled meeting rooms, laptops in hand, their voices filled with words like strategy investment AI and the Phoenix deal. Amid all that energy, a quiet meeting was about to take place. The door to the CEO's office opened slightly. A curly-haired intern peeked in. "Mr. Reed, there's a man here to see you. He says he's not looking for a job, just 5 minutes to talk." Marcus looked up from his files, his expression calm. "What's his name? Ethan Brooks, sir." Marcus paused for a beat. His gaze drifted toward the glass wall where the afternoon sunlight stretched into long golden lines across the floor. "Send him in." The intern nodded and stepped out. The door opened again. Ethan walked in, carrying a small cardboard box with a few personal items, a photo frame, a few notebooks, and a nameplate. He wore a white shirt and grey trousers, looking neat, yet strangely out of place in the gleaming office of a billion-dollar corporation. Marcus gestured toward a chair. "Sit down." Ethan didn't. He set the box down and clasped his hands together. "I'll only take a few minutes," he said, his voice slightly hoarse. "I didn't come to explain myself. I came to tell the truth." Marcus leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "I'm listening." Ethan took a deep breath, as if gathering all the courage he had left. "That day when you walked into the bank, I knew something was wrong. The way the receptionist spoke coldly, the way Mrs. Grant looked at you, I saw it all. But I didn't say anything. I thought, it's not my business. I was afraid of losing my job." He swallowed hard. "And when everything came to light, I realized silence is a choice, too. And that choice made me part of the problem." Marcus said nothing. He only nodded slightly, his gaze sharp yet quiet. Ethan continued, "I didn't come to ask for my job back. I just wanted to look you in the eye and say, I was wrong. I was weak. But I won't be weak again." He lowered his head. "I owe you thanks, not because you didn't fire me, but because you woke me up. I finally saw myself in the way I was afraid of what others might think." The room was silent. Only the hum of the air conditioner blended with the steady rhythm of their breathing. Marcus stood and walked toward the window. Outside, Dallas streets glowed orange-red as the evening traffic flowed endlessly like a river of light. He spoke without turning around. "You know, Ethan, most people aren't cruel. They're lazy." Ethan looked up. Lazy, Marcus nodded. Lazy to look deeper into others. Lazy to question themselves. Lazy to admit that maybe they're the ones who are wrong. He turned the light, outlining his face with strength and thoughtfulness. "You're not cruel, Ethan, but you were lazy. You stood there, saw what was wrong, and stayed silent. Because you were afraid, and fear is injustice's most loyal ally. Ethan's eyes blurred with tears. I know, and I hate that. I promise I won't let it happen again. Marcus stepped closer, his tone softening. Do you know the difference between the weak and the strong? Ethan shook his head. The weak look for excuses. The strong look for chances to make things right. He placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. I didn't destroy anyone. I only held up a mirror. You dared to look into it, and that's why I believe you'll change. Ethan looked up, surprised. You believe in me? Marcus smiled. I do. Because I was you once. The words made Ethan freeze. Marcus returned to his desk and poured 2 glasses of water. When I was your age, I stood in a bank, too. I just wanted to open an account for my first small business. The manager looked at me and asked, Are you sure you even have enough money? He gave a faint smile. Back then, I had no power, no voice, but I had memory. And that memory taught me never to forget the feeling of being judged. Ethan listened, his heart tightening. He realized the man's calm wasn't natural. It was forged through years of being underestimated and still rising above it. Marcus continued, You can't change what's already happened, but you can change how you respond next time. Every person is a mirror. They either reflect the light or multiply the darkness. The choice is yours. Ethan nodded quietly. I understand. Marcus took a sip of water. Good. Because I have an offer for you. He turned to him, his tone firm but warm. I won't send you back to that bank, but if you truly want to learn, I'll give you an internship here at Link Systems. 3 months, no salary. I want to see if you have the patience to do what's right, even when no one praises you and no one pays you. Ethan's eyes widened. His voice trembled. I don't deserve that. Marcus chuckled softly. You're right. You do not yet. But you can earn it. He set the glass down and looked straight into his eyes. And remember this, Ethan. Never wait for someone else to give you permission to do the right thing. The room stayed quiet for a moment. The last rays of sunlight slid across the table, casting a golden hue over their faces, one of a man who had conquered prejudice, and one of a young man who had just learned to face himself. Ethan clutched his box tightly and whispered, I won't let you down. Marcus nodded. You don't need to prove it to me. Prove it to yourself. Ethan smiled, a small, genuine smile. He bowed slightly, then turned toward the door. As his hand touched the handle, Marcus called out his voice, deep but steady. Ethan. The young man turned back. Never let your silence make others pay the price again. Ethan stood still for a few seconds, then said softly, I promise. The door closed, leaving Marcus alone in the golden glow of the sunset. He looked down at his glass of water, watching his reflection ripple across the surface. Part of him wanted to believe that the young man would truly change. Another part knew there were still countless others like Ethan out there. But he smiled anyway, because if even one person changed, the world would already be a little less dark. Marcus stood, turned off the lights, and opened the window. The Dallas breeze rushed in, carrying the sound of a living city. He gazed out at the fading sunset and whispered to himself, No one needs to shout to be heard. You just have to speak through action. 3 days later, the sky over Dallas was soft and grey, and a gentle breeze moved through the suburban streets. At a small community centre in the south of the city, a whiteboard by the gate bore a handwritten note in marker ink, Local Business Forum topic Financial Opportunities and Equality in Service. The meeting room was barely half the size of a classroom. Folding chairs were arranged in 3 rows, the ceiling fan creaked as it turned, and the smell of coffee mixed with the sounds of quiet conversation, shuffling papers and chairs, scraping against the floor. About 40 people filled the room, small business owners, mechanics, retired teachers, and a few young students waiting. None of them knew that the man they were about to hear speak was the same name dominating headlines across the nation all week. Marcus Reed sat in the last row wearing a grey t-shirt, jeans and clean white sneakers. No suit, no security detail, no spotlight. He came quietly, just another face in the crowd. He looked around. Some people were discussing small business loans that had been denied by banks. A woman complained about high transaction fees. A young man shared how he was told he didn't meet financial requirements. They all had one thing in common. They had all been underestimated. When the program coordinator stepped up, the microphone crackled softly. She smiled and said, "We have a special guest today, though I believe most of you already know his name from recent news. Please welcome Mr. Marcus Reed." A murmur spread through the room. A few heads turned in surprise. Marcus stood, walked calmly to the front. He brought no notes, no PowerPoint, only a story. His voice was deep, clear, with every word. 3 days ago, I walked into a bank. I had all the documents, all the assets, all the reason to be treated like anyone else. But I was looked at as if I didn't belong there. The room fell silent. No one said my name. No one asked what I needed. They just looked judged and decided I wasn't worthy. He paused, scanning the faces before him. I'm not telling this story to point fingers. I'm telling it because it's not just my story. It's the story of many people in this room. A man in the middle row nodded slowly, his expression heavy. A young woman clenched her handbag, her lips trembling. Marcus continued his tone, slower, deeper, each word landing like a quiet truth. People think discrimination is when someone yells at you, but sometimes it hides in a glance that says nothing, in a forced smile, in 10 minutes of silence that make you feel small. He paused again. A long stillness filled the air before his voice grew stronger. That day I didn't argue. I didn't get angry. I simply walked out and made a phone call. And 15 minutes later, the people who mocked me lost their jobs. The room stirred. A few people gasped softly. Marcus smiled, not proudly, but gently, as if to remind. But the real victory wasn't that. It was in the young man who came to see me days later, the one who stayed silent while watching me be mistreated. He came, admitted his mistake, and asked to relearn how to see people again. That is real change. He looked across the room, his tone softening. I'm not here to make anyone feel guilty. I'm here to remind you that we've all at some point been the silent person in the wrong room. An older man in a mechanic's jacket raised his hand. "Mr. Reed," he said, his voice rough from years of cigarettes. "Do you really believe people can change?" Marcus looked at him for a moment, then nodded. "I do. But change doesn't start with promises. It starts with action. Sit with your shame. Call it by its name. Then do better, not once, but every time." The mechanic was quiet for a while, then nodded slowly. Marcus looked around the room. We live in a world where people would rather judge than understand. But if we could pause just once and ask a simple question, am I seeing a person or just a stereotype? Maybe the world would look different. A student from the back row spoke up. "Why do you think people judge others so easily?" Marcus answered. "Because they're afraid. Afraid of difference. afraid of losing control, afraid of having to change their view. But there's only one thing more frightening than fear itself. It's learning nothing from your mistakes. He stepped down from the small stage, leaving the microphone behind. The sound of his footsteps echoed softly on the wooden floor. Standing among the audience, his voice carried low and steady. I used to think success meant being respected. But now I understand respect isn't something others give you. It's something you give even when no one gives it back. The room was still. A few people lowered their heads. Some quietly wiped tears from their eyes. Marcus glanced at the front row, where a middle-aged woman sat someone who had once been denied a loan because she didn't look financially trustworthy. He smiled gently. If anyone ever made you feel invisible, remember this. It's not because you're small. It's because they only know how to see with their eyes. The room erupted in applause. Not loud, but slow and sincere. Marcus raised his hand slightly, signaling for calm, and spoke his final words, low, clear, and full of weight. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's simply someone walking out of a room without bowing their head. He bowed slightly in thanks, then quietly stepped off the platform. Outside the community center, the evening wind swept through the parking lot. Across the sky, the sunset painted the city in shades of orange. Marcus stood alone for a moment, taking a deep breath, then unlocked his phone. A message from Laura Jennings appeared. Audit completed. Dallas branch now has new leadership. All staff enrolled in retraining program. Thank you for making us reflect on ourselves. Marcus read it, didn't reply. He simply smiled and slipped the phone into his pocket. From a distance, a few attendees came out of the building, calling after him. Mr. Reed, thank you. That was an incredible speech. He nodded and said softly, "Thank you for listening." Then he walked away down the sunlit street, the wind brushing through his hair, the golden light soft across his calm face. No stage, no title. Just a man choosing to stand on the side of what's right, even when no one is watching. Night fell over Dallas slowly, like a thin blanket being laid across the city. Streetlights began to glow along the main avenue, casting soft golden ribbons of light. Marcus Reed drove his Tesla quietly through the city. No music. No phone calls, only the sound of tires gliding over the pavement and the steady breathing of a man reflecting on what he had just set in motion. All week the world had spoken for him. The media wrote, social networks debated, and people called him the silent hero, the CEO of justice. But Marcus knew the truth. He was no hero. He was simply a man who had grown tired of needing permission to be respected. He pulled over on a quiet road with a view of the shimmering Trinity River. The city looked almost unreal that night, peaceful calm as if no one remembered the storm that had just passed. Marcus stepped out of the car and let the cool breeze slip beneath his collar. He looked up at the tall buildings reflecting on the water and thought back to his first day in Dallas, a 25-year-old man with empty hands and a dream no one believed in. He remembered being denied a loan 3 times for insufficient documentation, even though his file was thick as a book. He remembered signing his first contract and hearing someone ask, "Are you really the CEO? You don't look like one." Those memories had once been wounds. Now they were scars. But the scars had taught him that some lessons can only be learned through pain. The ringing of his phone pulled him back. The screen showed the name Laura Jennings. He answered. "Marcus," her voice was calm but soft. "I just received the final report from the Dallas branch. How does it look? Good. They've replaced the entire client reception process, retrained the staff. And the strange thing is, customers are coming back, Marcus chuckled. Justice seems to be good marketing too, doesn't it? Laura let out a small laugh. Maybe so. But what impressed me wasn't the numbers, it was a thank you letter. A thank you letter, yes. From Pamela Grant herself. She wrote, "Thank you for making me face myself before it was too late." Marcus stayed silent for a few seconds, as the wind carried a faint scent of river water. "People only change when they truly see themselves in the mirror," he said quietly. "And you gave them that mirror?" Marcus shook his head, though she couldn't see it. "I just turned on the light. Whether they choose to look, that's up to them." On the other end, Laura was silent for a moment before saying, "Either way, Marcus, you should know this. What you didn't just change one branch. It made the whole system rethink how it treats people. Sometimes change begins with one person who dares to stand still and say, 'Enough.'" Maybe he replied, "But I don't want to stand still forever. I want the world to learn how to walk together, not over each other." The call ended. Marcus returned to his car, but didn't get in right away. He leaned against the door, watching the lights ripple across the river's surface. In the dark, he thought about Ethan Brooks, the young employee who once bowed his head out of fear. By now, Ethan was probably starting his first day at Lynx Systems. Marcus smiled. That young man would go far because Ethan had learned something many people never do, how to take responsibility for his silence. His phone buzzed again. A message from Ethan. "First day at Lynx. Not easy, but I'm trying. Thank you for believing in me." Marcus didn't reply. He just looked at the screen and nodded slightly. Because sometimes trust itself is a kind of silence, the silence of hope. The night wind grew stronger. In the distance, the lights from the Margaret Hunt Hill Bridge shimmered on the water, forming glimmering lines like thin blades of light. Marcus watched them and realized something. The world isn't divided neatly between good and evil. It's a spectrum of grey, where every small action, a glance, a greeting, a moment of silence, shapes either justice or injustice. He remembered something his mother used to say. You can't change the whole world, but you can change someone's world by treating them right. He closed his eyes and sighed. Perhaps that was why he had never chosen revenge. Revenge makes others hurt, but forgiveness makes you free. Another sound came this time from the car radio. The evening news was playing. In Dallas, a new training initiative has begun under the theme, Respect as Default in Customer Service. Many businesses were inspired by the recent actions of CEO Marcus Reed, praised for his calm and humane response to discrimination at a local bank. Marcus smiled faintly. A calm and humane response, he repeated softly. No one knew how many times he had been belittled before he learned to stay calm. He sat in the driver's seat and started the car. The screen reflected his face, tired yet clear and steady. He looked at his own reflection and whispered, "Some battles are won in silence, but that silence isn't weakness, it's a choice." The car rolled forward slowly, leaving the river behind. As he passed through a quiet neighborhood, Marcus noticed a group of young people repainting the front of a small shop. On a temporary wooden sign above them, fresh letters gleamed in white paint. Respect is our policy. Marcus laughed, a real laugh, light and free, as if the weight on his chest had finally lifted. Perhaps the seed he planted had begun to grow. Quietly, without fanfare. but it was taking root in the hearts of those who had heard the story. When he got home, Marcus turned off the engine and sat still in the dark. The night was deep, filled only with the chirping of crickets and the ticking of a wall clock. He opened the window, drew a deep breath, and looked out toward the city lights, merging with the horizon. In his mind, he heard his grandmother's final words before she passed. Real strength isn't about making people fear you. It's about making them think. He smiled. Today, many people had been made to think. And that was the most beautiful victory of all. He spoke softly, as if sending his words into the wind. You don't need to shout to be heard. You just need to stand tall and keep walking. Outside, a gentle breeze swept through, carrying away the last sounds of the night, leaving behind a calm that felt like closure. In the quiet room, Marcus Reed's face rested in the silver glow of moonlight, peaceful, composed, as if he had finished not just a story, but left behind a silent legacy. The next morning, the first rays of sunlight streamed through the glass walls of Link Systems' office, scattering across the floor like shards of crystal. Dallas woke early, and with it a new chapter in the journey of Marcus Reed began. On his desk lay a stack of letters sent from all over, messages of gratitude from small business owners, invitations to speak at conferences, and heartfelt notes from strangers, people who had once been overlooked, judged or dismissed simply because they didn't look the part. Marcus opened one handwritten letter, the cursive slanted and simple. I'm a bank employee in Arizona. After hearing your story, I started looking at every customer as if I were looking at my own parents. No bias, no assumptions. Thank you for making me reflect on myself. He set the letter down gently. A feeling both warm and bittersweet spread through his chest. He didn't need titles or praise from the press. This was the real reward. A soft knock sounded at the door. Ethan Brooks walked in, holding a cup of coffee. Good morning, Mr. Reed. I made it just how you like, black, no sugar. Marcus smiled. Thank you. Have a seat. Ethan sat down, his eyes clearer than when they first met. He was still the same young man, but something about him had changed. He now carried confidence awareness. Marcus asked, How's your first week at Lynx? Ethan replied, Honestly, it's tough, but I'm learning so much. No one here cares about what I did wrong before. They only care about how willing I am to learn. That's how the world should work, Marcus said. Don't judge people by their past, only by what they do in the present. Ethan nodded. Then, after a moment of silence, he spoke quietly. I still remember that day, when you told me I was lazy to look deeper. I thought about that all night. Now I understand not seeing others is the easiest way to avoid responsibility. Marcus looked at him, a smile flickering in his eyes. You've understood. He took a sip of coffee, then asked, If one day you're the one making decisions, what will you do differently? Ethan answered without hesitation. I won't wait for anyone else to act. And I'll teach those under me that respect never needs a reason. Marcus nodded slowly. Good. Remember that. They both stood. Marcus walked to the window and pointed toward the building across the street where the sign for Southern Capital Bank had just been replaced. See that they changed their slogan. Respect is our foundation. Ethan smiled faintly. It's ironic, but it's progress. Marcus said nothing. Sunlight fell across his face, outlining the calm strength in his features. The world won't change in a day, Ethan. But every time someone chooses respect over judgment, it shifts a little. We just have to keep going, Ethan asked. And you, sir, will you keep going? Marcus turned and smiled. I can't stop, because when others see themselves in my mirror, I see myself in them. Ethan bowed slightly, then walked out of the room. Marcus turned back to his desk, his gaze resting on the reflection in the glass. In that reflection, he was no longer a CEO, just a man who had once been hurt, but chose healing over revenge. He spoke softly, almost to himself. Justice doesn't need noise. It only needs someone willing to do what's right, even when no one's watching. Outside, Dallas gleamed bright under the morning sun. In that reflection, Marcus's silhouette merged with the window, steady, upright, and at peace. Late afternoon draped Dallas in a golden hue. The sun leaned over the glass buildings, scattering long streaks of light like ribbons of fire. Marcus Reed gathered the last few files on his desk, shut down his computer, and stood still, gazing around the room where he had spent countless sleepless nights. There were no more phone calls, no more clacking of keys, only the rare stillness that follows a long storm. On his desk lay a small card. Laura Jennings had left it that morning after their meeting. Justice is not just the result of law, but the reaction of conscience. Thank you for reminding us of that. Marcus held the card and smiled softly. He knew the story of Southern Capital Bank had come to an end, but the journey toward justice never truly ends. That evening he left the Link Systems building. The city glowed under the lights, the sound of traffic blending with the rhythm of life. Marcus drove through familiar streets, places that had witnessed his beginnings, from the first business meetings held in a tiny cafe to the day he signed the contract that acquired the largest financial group in the state. Now he no longer thought about deals, power, or status. The only thing that remained in him was the meaning behind his actions. He stopped the car in front of Jefferson High School, where he had spent his senior year. The gate was old, the sign faded, but the words were still there. Integrity builds. Legacy. Marcus walked into the courtyard and sat on an old wooden bench near the football field. The chirping of crickets filled the air, and the soft scent of freshly cut grass drifted with the night breeze. He thought of his grandmother, the woman who raised him with calloused hands, and her words echoed in his mind. Some people only recognize crowns if they're made of gold, but yours is made of backbone. Keep it straight, and you'll never have to bow to anyone. He whispered, "I did it, Grandma." His voice was quiet, but steady, like wind brushing through the trees. From afar, headlights appeared. A car stopped at the gate. Ethan stepped out, holding an envelope. "Mr. Reed," he called a little out of breath. "I just got an email from headquarters. The Respect First program has been approved across the entire network. They said it was inspired by your story." Marcus smiled. "Good. Then what we did wasn't in vain." Ethan walked closer and handed him the envelope. "And this is my final report for the internal training program. I'm about to be reinstated full-time." Marcus opened the envelope and read the title, Project Reflection, Training Program on Awareness and Service Ethics. Beneath it was a handwritten note from Ethan. "Every change begins with a mirror." Marcus nodded slowly. "You've learned, Ethan. No one has to be perfect to become better. They just need the courage to face themselves." Ethan smiled, his voice trembling with emotion. "I learned that from you." They stood there bathed in the golden glow of the old schoolyard, 2 generations one, who had weathered the storm, and one who had just learned to stand in the wind. Marcus looked toward the horizon, where the sky was turning violet. He said quietly, "Perhaps it's time for me to move on. Somewhere out there, someone will need to be reminded "That dignity never requires permission." Ethan asked, "Where will you go?" Marcus replied, his tone calm and sure, "Wherever a mirror is needed." He walked back to his car, opened the door, then stopped. "Ethan." "Yes. If you ever see someone being treated the way I once was, don't wait. Be the first to stand up." Ethan nodded firmly. "I promise." Marcus smiled, stepped into the car and turned on the headlights. The white beam stretched across the long road ahead. As the car disappeared beyond the line of trees, a soft gust lifted the fine dust around Ethan's feet. He stood there, watching, his eyes glowing in the dark. In the distance, Dallas shimmered with light, and among the thousands of bright lights, one small flame still burned, quiet, steady, enduring like the legacy of a man who chose justice over pride, compassion over power. From the perspective of an expert in leadership ethics and human culture, the journey of Marcus Reed is not merely a story about power used rightly, but a testament that dignity does not come from business cards or titles. It comes from how people treat one another in the moments when no one is watching. When silence is used to reflect instead of retaliate, it becomes a tool for true transformation. Marcus never sought recognition. He simply left behind a mirror for each of us to look into and ask ourselves, are we seeing others through prejudice or through respect? If you believe that justice does not need to be loud, but only needs to be seen through the right actions, then, like this video, to spread that value. Subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the stories where compassion is tested by power, and comment below the phrase that shows your belief in human dignity. Hold your dignity.